For the state of Utah, the rising generation is a priceless treasure. Today's landscape is filled with a multitude of challenges. We can agree that a high priority should be to do all we can to appropriately help and encourage each individual to become their best version. In light of recent Supreme Court holdings, the focus of HB 514 school chaplain amendments is to establish a process with threshold parameters to have a formal discussion. The bill does not assume a specific outcome or answers to the discussion, but requires specific guidelines to be addressed and puts in place a process to review the merit of allowing professionally trained and certified chaplaincy in a public school setting. If the bill passes, the process will begin. If it does not pass, there will not be a discussion or process at this time. Many feel there is a benefit in passing the bill and drawing upon the rich, diverse perspective, brain trust, and unique experiences of all willing people within our state to have the discussion. This bill honors certified professional counselors in schools. Schools will continue to be required to have one counselor for every 350 students. The bill is an entirely opt-in program for districts to adopt school volunteer chaplains if they so choose. Our districts will be the laboratories of democracy. This only authorizes districts to have volunteer chaplains so the public money will not be spent on religious instruction. The school districts will each determine their own policies for certifications and qualifications. This will enable them to establish practices to protect children and mitigate concerns of unqualified chaplains serving, and prevents groups like the Satanic Temple from being involved in schools. Students are suffering from a wide range of emotional and behavioral issues. The involvement of a chaplain can provide a calming and stabilizing influence in the lives of students who choose to utilize this resource. We have a heritage of chaplaincy in our country's military and in our legislative bodies from our founding until the current day. Chaplains have played an integral and storied role in the history of the United States. George Washington asked for chaplains to be appointed in the Continental Army to discourage vice and immorality. Now, I think we have to better understand what a chaplain does. Simply stated, chaplains offer spiritual care. Spiritual care has to do with issues of meaning, hope, and transcendence that are often more pronounced during illness, injury, birth, and death. Spiritual care helps people address questions such as, why is this happening? What does this mean? How do I make sense of this? Where will this take me? What gives me the ability to cope? What gives me comfort? What next? For some, spiritual care also includes religious support. For others, it means providing a non-anxious, caring presence in the midst of an anxious time or experience. I think that's an important thing to distinguish what a chaplain is from what an evangelist is or what a preacher is. These are very different things. They are not placed in a space like this in order to convert people to a way of thinking. They're there to listen, to care, to help. With that, President, I'm open for questions.
Senator Reby.
Thank you, Mr. President. We heard this bill in committee, and we had many certified chaplains show up and say that they were not in favor of this bill. I was quoted in the newspaper saying, if the chaplains don't want the chaplain bill, that speaks volumes to this bill. I then reached out to our alleged research and asked them if this is a constitutionality problem. And this does violate the Constitution of Utah. Article 1, Section 4 says religious liberty. So even though these chaplains do not have an obligation to be part of a religion, it is a little disconcerting when somebody announces who they are. Each one of those chaplains got up and said, I'm Reverend so-and-so, I'm so-and-so. So they are associated with a religion. We are putting chaplains, if this bill passes, in a K through 6 setting. These kids are vulnerable, and although I appreciate all the chaplains and the work they do, I would not feel comfortable having a chaplain talk to my student about their religion. The other part about this is that it also violates the possibility that if the school districts were creating a policy, spending public funds to create a policy, they might be violating the Constitution that says we are not allowed to spend funds on religious institutions. So I believe this bill is United States constitutionality violation, a Utah Constitution violation, and I also believe that it's not appropriate for
Somehow you might want to go ahead. Thank you. Go ahead and finish that comment. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't think it's appropriate for us to have chaplains in our schools, and our chaplains don't think it's appropriate either. So I disagree with this policy, and I don't think we should be voting aye for this.
Thank you, Senator Fillmore.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate that. I'm a little apprehensive about this bill and this policy. If we open this door, we will have literally no control over who walks through it, and nor will schools, right? They will be unable to differentiate between, religion A, religion B, no religion C. I think that we will come to really regret this bill if it passes when we see the results. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kwan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the sponsor yield?
Senator Johnson, will you yield?
Sure.
What is the difference between a life coach and a chaplain?
Simply stated,
Senator Johnson, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, simply stated, chaplains offer spiritual care in a clinical setting. Spiritual care has to do with issues of meaning, hope, transcendence that are often more pronounced during illness, injury, birth, and death. What does spiritual care mean? I think we've inserted a lot of straw man arguments because we're talking about someone who is there to help, to listen, to talk, and we seem to have shifted this to a discussion of a minister or a preacher that's there to convert or to convince people they have to live a certain way. These people are there to help. They're there to give comfort. They're there to listen more than anything.
Thank you.
Follow up, Senator Kwan.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I would venture to say that a life coach does very similar things, and a life coach often has focus in on the development and interest in the development of the client, or in this case of the child. I would venture to also say that we do need more people in our schools to help with the mental health of our kids. But the question here is who would provide that mental health, and whether it should come from a volunteer or people who we employ who are trained and who have licenses and have a background in doing this. I would also venture to say that the difference between a chaplain and a life coach is that spiritual, often equaling religious background. And even though this is something that is volunteer for our kids to go to, and a choice for our kids to go to, I know as a professor of child development, lifespan development, I should say, I know that when there is not options within their own, a person's own spiritual background, it tends to make that child feel unwelcome or that they don't have anyone to turn to. And in fact, one of the chaplains said that as well. So I would just say I appreciate the sponsor to his explanation here, but I would like to see more mental health professionals instead. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Senator Cullimore.
Thank you, President. I want to commend the sponsor and the floor sponsor on the intent of this bill, because I agree that we need to get more spirituality in our youth. We need them to be grounded in moral values. With that said, I have concerns similar to what was expressed by Senator Fillmore, that if we open this door, we can't control what walks through there. We don't know what chaplains are going to be approved. And I also have problems about line 66, that it requires each LEA to inform the State Board of Education of the LEA's interest level in allowing school chaplains. This requires every school to come back to the State Board and tell them why or why not they believe chaplains are appropriate. And I'm concerned that LEAs are going to make the case against more religion, against more morality in schools. And I would prefer to not see that, as I think that the direction that this bill is intended is the right direction. I'm just not convinced that this is the path at this time.
Thank you. Senator Johnson, I don't see any more discussion. Going to you for summation and a motion.
You know, when the bill sponsor came to me and talked about this bill, I was a little reluctant to run it in this body, precisely for the kinds of questions that get asked. Then I went to the committee hearings, and I observed an outright disdain for religious principles within our schools. Due to the nature of where we're headed culturally, you're going to have to get used to legislative hearings that are getting weirder. This is one reason why many are opting for home-centered educational opportunities, which hasn't sunk in yet. This also explains why our current educational choice options will be way oversubscribed. It would be helpful and much easier if my colleagues would take our efforts here not as an attack, but as a rescue mission. I fear the time has come that a prominent local church leader referred to when many will attempt to serve the Lord without offending the devil. We're all going to be severely tested to the limits here soon enough. I feel that deep in my bones. We all need to shore up our foundations of faith. I've heard no less than 2 people share the sentiment that maybe Satan just was misunderstood, and it wasn't really fair to cast him out of heaven. I believe that chaplains can aid students in need. I believe that by providing a spiritual listening ear would be good for our students in our public schools. With that, Mr. President, I move that HB 514 pass.
Thank you. And the question is, under suspension of the rules, shall House Bill 514 pass? Roll call vote.
Senators Baldery, Bluen, Bramble, Buxton, Cullimore, Escamilla, Fillmore.
Senator Fillmore.
Yeah, Mr. President, I understand the reason why this bill is proposed and why it's run. I think many of us here see some real cultural problems inside schools that manifest themselves in how they treat the idea of religion. But that culture exists independent of chaplains. And again, my worry here is that inserting volunteer chaplains won't change the culture, but the culture will change the chaplain. No.
Senators Grover, Harper, Hinkins, Ibsen, Johnson, Kennedy, Kwan.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Chaplains, in my experience, so I've spent a lot of time in my professional life in hospitals and And life and death, of course, happens in the hospitals. We prefer that, of course, not to happen in our schools. But I was very touched a long time ago, so it was around the year 2000, that I was a resident in a hospital in Michigan. And a very experienced cardiologist had just had a critical error happen during a cardiac catheterization. So the story I heard later was that this cardiologist was doing a medical procedure on a patient, and the patient coded on the table and died in front of this cardiologist. This cardiologist had, he was a very gruff individual who was really hard to deal with. He had a lot of knowledge and experience, but my experience, I was sitting in the library studying, the hospital library studying a long time ago, and I didn't know what had happened, and I was across the room. They didn't see me, but the cardiologist and a chaplain, the hospital chaplain, walked in across this library. They didn't see me, and the chaplain and the cardiologist, and I found out that whole backstory later, but the chaplain and the cardiologist walked in, sat down at a table, and I'd never seen a man cry so sincerely and so in such a heartbroken fashion. I was shocked to see this gruff, crusty cardiologist with all this experience cry. And he needed somebody there at the time to help him in a way that was more than just a colleague who said, yeah, better luck next time you catheterize somebody or whatever. My experience with chaplains, primarily hospital-based, I've never seen them in schools, has been it's another tool in the toolbox. Sadly, bad things do happen in our schools, and they happen outside of our schools, and then our children show up to the schools, and they need somebody to be there for them. And I understand we goodness sake, we don't know the qualifications entirely, the hearts and minds of all the people that come into the school, the janitor and the teacher and all that sort of thing. The chaplain could have nefarious intent. I understand that. They could sway the children one way or the other. But sadly, critical things do happen in our schools, and is a chaplain, if a school were to choose it, is a chaplain somebody that potentially could be of use to a child in need? My response to that, and my experience in the hospitals, is I believe chaplains can be helpful. And the nice thing, this was a must, now it's a may, and to me, a school can choose not to do this if they want to as well. So, Mr. President, for that reason, and my experience in the hospitals, watching chaplains help people in their most critical times of need, I vote aye on this bill. Thank you very much.
Senators Kwan, McKay, McKell, Milner, Owens, Pitcher, Plum, Reby, Sandal, Stevenson, Thatcher, Vickers, Weiler, Wilson, Winterton, Buxton,
Senator Buxton.
I have really mixed emotions about this. My experience with chaplains have been very, very good and very, very bad in the military. I've seen them be there for people and in times of distress and heartache. I've seen them in the front of a military class full of recruits telling filthy jokes. I have a really turmoil in making this decision, but I feel that the guidelines that are there seem to me to be a little too vague. I think that, especially in a community where we have seminaries and we have a lot of religious activity here, I'm not sure that that's the activity that will come in as chaplains. I think that the door is too wide open, and so I guess I would vote no.
Harper, McKell, Milner, Sandal, Wilson, President Adams.
Aye. House Bill 514, having received 12 yea votes, 16 nay votes, 1 being absent, fails to pass and will be returned to the House for filing.